Hello, people. Welcome to episode 203 of the Stand Speak Shine podcast. I'm Cherie Burton, and this is a podcast for those who long to feel, express, and be who they truly are. Today, we're going into all these feminine aspects of transformation, what it means to be on a feminine spiritual path, and or cross-cultural and distinctly feminine ways of being and thinking that nurture our creativity and provide a sustainable way for us to live and to work. My guest today is Karen Kinney. She's the author of 2 books, one of which, her latest, is Doorways to Transformation, Everyday Wisdom for the Creative Soul. She's a visual artist, a freelance writer, a teacher. She lives in San Miguel de Allende, Mexico. She has pursued this really fascinating, multifaceted art career. Her work's been in exhibitions nationally and internationally. She has articles and essays that have appeared in numerous publications. She's also studied contemplative spirituality for over 20 years and has taught about creative freedom and inner transformation in Hong Kong, Mexico, and the US. So we just go into this whole discussion around how you let your creativity flow from a very embodied state of ease and grace. Karen, I'm so glad to have you here. I know we were going to talk in 2022 and you had a loss. You lost your mother, which you and I discussed after. That's quite a demarcation in one's life. To lose their mother. Mm-hmm. And here you are coming back into space to have this conversation now. And do you feel like there might be a deepening there, even since when we were going to record previously?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good question. And I definitely think so. I mean, I haven't spent a ton of time consciously thinking about that, but I think in my intuitive subconscious knowing, I think there's definitely symbolism to that, and just my whole call towards the divine feminine and strengthening, and maybe I think going to the next level. Certainly, I think with her passing, I think there's a lot of symbolism there. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
It's like we have lost the mother on so many levels, right? And when we lose our actual mother, which I haven't yet, but I know those days are approaching at some time in the future. And it's a time of reckoning, perhaps. And we can explore that more later. I didn't mean to dive right into that part, but I know that you are an artist and you're an author, and you've had a really beautiful path to, I guess, finding your own creative flow and then teaching others how to step into that space. But I want to start with your journey, and how one of the things that piqued my interest when you reached out was the sacred feminine, how you found the sacred feminine in Mexico, which is where you're living now, which you're not originally from Mexico. So maybe walk us through a little, maybe key points of your upbringing, and then kind of maybe that tipping point or awakening, and how you found this beautiful presence where you are now in Mexico.
Yeah, so sure. I grew up in just a Protestant Christian church. It was actually a non-denominational church. And so, as one would imagine, it's much more of a patriarchal view. It's God and Father God, and a lot of the teachers are men. And for me, it wasn't. It was actually a positive introduction to the divine. For many people, it is not. The church isn't the right setting for that. However, yeah, it was very, very patriarchal and very skewed. Not just male, but white male, and that whole thing. And so I think I didn't plan to have this awakening to the divine feminine and all this.
We never do.
No, but it just happened. So this is almost a decade ago when I was turning 40. And I didn't plan for it to happen at 40 either. It just naturally happened. And really it was this longing, like a very deep longing within me to understand the feminine side of God, or the goddess, or divine feminine. There's lots of names for this, but it was really a spiritual hunger to broaden beyond how I'd been raised, because, the divine's ultimately infinite. So I feel like I barely scratched the surface of that infinite expanse as a child. So, yeah. And, go ahead.
So what was that pain? What was the pain?
I think it was a realization that for me, spirituality has been a lifelong passion and probably my most strongly felt passion. So to realize that I've had this deep passion and exploration my whole life, and it's been so limited in scope. And I think there was anger that came up in me around that. And I'm not sure anger at what or who, but more just this awareness of the very limited nature of my journey and a hunger for more. And actually a really pivotal book for me was Sue Monk Kidd's book, The Dance of the Dissident Daughter. And I forget her subtitle, but it's about her journey.
Sacred Feminine Awakening or something.
Yeah.
That was that book, if any of you listeners have not read it, it was written in the 90s, wasn't it?
Yeah, a long time. I feel like a long time ago.
Yeah. So she was raised in a very traditional Christian religion and married a pastor or something. Anyway, she's very adept at describing that pain that you're referencing, whether it's in a religious setting or an academic setting, but she makes it about her spiritual path, her religious path, and how she had this awakening and kind of the initiation around it. And that book was I can't remember what year I read it, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, but it really, I resonated with. She gave words to what I was experiencing internally. And she's a great writer. She's also written novels. And anyway, so what was it that touched you about that? What, just the name Dissident Daughter is like rebellious, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think because it's not allowed. I mean, it depends what kind of culture you grew up in, but in a lot of religions, and this isn't just Christianity, it could be fundamentalism in any form, in any religion. Right. There's very much a narrow focus. There's this tribal emphasis. There's a closed mindset as opposed to open. And so hence her word, using the word dissident, or, I think in those kind of closed cultures that are not open to other perspectives or to exploration, if you move outside of what the norm is, then that is a form of rebellion. So,
right. And how is change ever exacted without that energy?
Yeah.
Revolutionary energy of and it is sacred to every person. It can look at the outset like it's very rebellious and anything nonconformist. Mm-hmm. I mean, it doesn't bring us to where we're actually going, where we actually need to go.
Right.
Anything nonconformist, let me rephrase that. Anytime that we're in a conforming mindset, it's not going to get us to the place where humanity is trying to evolve. We have to get out of that box. So you had this, you said you grew up in the Midwest. It was very pragmatic when we talked earlier, and it was just, this is the way things are done. And there's the practical, and that's not the feminine, right? That's
it's like a box to me. I don't know. It's just, I don't know. There's more of a standard way of living and more people adhere to it. I'll say that. And from the Midwest, before coming to Mexico, I was in California for almost 20 years. So, and I think a lot of people go to California to find some layer of, freedom or expansion or less maybe box-like thinking than where they're from. And and so then I feel like coming to Mexico has taken it one step further. I feel like in many ways, what I've come to learn and appreciate about Mexico, one of the many things, is that there are a lot of feminine qualities in the culture, and there's a very overt reverence for Guadalupe, who actually used to be an Aztec goddess called Tonantzin that the indigenous people here very much honored and revered before the Spanish conquest, and then she was kind of converted into Guadalupe. But anyway, it's there's a very overt and visible honoring of her. And I've never lived in a country where, you see her image everywhere. She's carried in processions. And that's kind of had a visceral impact on me in terms of seeing this feminine divine image literally being carried by people through the streets. It's like, wow, that does touch me in a way that I didn't expect. And so my journey here has really deepened in a lot of ways, divine feminine.
That's so interesting. One of my pulls to the Magdalene path or learning more and diving deep about Mary Magdalene and the Gnostic texts and the traditions in France is they do that exact same thing in the south of France on her feast day every year, July 22nd. They literally have her relics and they, parade them, for lack of a better word, through the streets. And there's a public honoring of this sacred feminine. I want to call her an icon and an archetype, but an actual historical figure. And I know Guadalupe, it's a similar, for that indigenous culture, it's Our Lady of Guadalupe. It's a very saint-like. So Mary Magdalene is also deemed a saint in the Catholic Church now. And she was a penitent whore for, almost 1,500 years or 1,600 years. So, well, actually, longer than that. But as that touched you on some level in your soul, and you realized, oh, this wasn't my reality where I grew up. What did you do with that? How did that manifest in your life, and how did that change things for you?
I think it's really become, and I think I shared this earlier when we spoke previously, that for me, it moved from an intellectual understanding to kind of this embodied experience. And that's come just through, I've been here about 4.5 years now. And in the small town that I've been in at San Miguel de Allende, there's very much a feminine energy, in addition to the honoring of Guadalupe and her being a strong part of the culture. There's very much just a feminine energy, a deep relational interconnectedness in the town. I've learned a lot about more being in process with things and receiving, and kind of these feminine, more typically feminine qualities that are just part of the culture here. And so I think it moved from this intellectual headspace of, oh, this is really interesting for me to maybe read about in a book or think about in my head, to like, oh, I'm starting to live a different way. And I would say a lot of it is more from a more feminine energy. And I really credit that to the culture here, and not just the processions and things like that, which certainly aid and give energy to it. But it's like, I've learned a different way of being. So that's been really interesting and kind of exciting for me to see, because I guess that's what we all want, right? To eventually learn to embody things. And that would be another part, right, of a feminine pathway, would be moving from the mind to the body.
So this relaxed ease, this flow, this interconnectivity, this collaborative energy, I think we're moving into that as a species, but it's going to be really rocky. There are many people that you have to kind of get out of your bubble, because that's what it was for me. My bubble burst. I had to get out of what was normal and how I was acculturated and programmed and indoctrinated to some degree, to a great degree, actually. It was just the air I was breathing in, the water I was swimming in, and you don't know any different. But when you go out of that environment and you traverse the earth, you find out, like, we lived in New Zealand for 6 months, and it was very much what you're talking about. It was a very feminine, matriarchal, but not matriarchal in a dominant way, just very collaborative and inclusive. And I know New Zealand is not without its problems with patriarchy and domestic violence and those kinds of things. But by and large, there was just, it's same with Hawaii. I feel that when I go to Hawaii. So we're kind of having to go outside what's familiar to be initiated into the deeper connectivity of everything and everyone. And this separatist stuff is not serving us. It's keeping us from really healing. And
very much so. And I feel like, while I've been living here in Mexico, I wrote my second book, which is entitled Doorways to Transformation. And the subtitle's Everyday Wisdom for the Creative Soul. But this entire book was written while I've been in this country. And I don't think that was accidental. Like, I feel like, there was divine kind of orchestration with that, because in the book, I share a lot about kind of feminine aspects of transformation, including this whole, being interconnected and learning to receive and allowing ease, and the things you've been referencing. I have, short meditative chapters in this book that address all of those things. But also I interweave kind of snippets of cultural living here in Mexico to support them. And so it's interesting to hear what you say about New Zealand and some of these other places, or Hawaii, that I can imagine that, there would be a similar feel. And it's just the value system is different. And relational connectedness is very high on that value system. And then your priorities shift. When that's the main priority, everything shifts, really.
Well, and this is a deeper conversation, but I think what I feel when I go to those places like Hawaii and New Zealand is the indigenous, beautiful sort of healing or medicine woman. It's very inclusive, and it's very it's just this beautiful, radiant. It's nature. It's the indigenous traditions. Like in New Zealand, it was the Maori, and I know in Hawaii they have a lot of ties to that. Just the island people and the welcoming and the just anyway. It's just hard for me. I'm trying to talk about it and I can't really explain it. It's to be experienced. It's to be experienced, and it's to be embodied. And it's just a part of me now. And so it was returning to the United States after living in New Zealand for 6 months in I want to say it was 2015. It might be 2016. My dates are it was 2015. No, it was 2016. It was such a contrast of kind of trying to integrate back into something that I had been embodied in and for that time, and to try to fit my old ways of thinking into the Western, let's just say, the colonization is the word I'm looking for, that these indigenous, that there's still this indigenous experience that's alive, that wants to live and thrive and is trying to be colonized. And that was really hard for me to see how that has been my experience, that many of the women and men, we've been colonized. Again, that's another discussion, but anyway. So you write Doorways to Transformation, which I've had the privilege of reading. It's beautiful poetry. It's deep. For me, the way that we do transform is through creativity. I'm in the process of writing a manuscript. I'll be heading out of the country here this weekend to go to Germany and to write. And I don't know why I'm going there. I kind of do. I have one class to teach there, but I'm like, why am I being drawn now to Germany? I've never been there. And as I'm listening to you speak about Mexico, I'm like, I know that it's European, white, predominant, whatever, but I do have ancestors from that region. And I do feel like there's something for me to pick up there while I write. So for you, saying that, about the portal to transformation being largely our creativity and how we let that flow, what do you experience in that realm? Because that's literally the name of your book, Doorways to Transformation through Creativity. So how, if you in your brain could explain to us in your own, I know it's very right brain and it's very experiential, but how would you explain that to a person who maybe doesn't even feel like they're very creative? Like they would never sit down to write a book or a song or whatever we think of as art.
Yeah. Well, I think there are a lot of ways to allow creativity in our lives. Sure, that doesn't have to look like formally attached to writing or art or things like that. And I think for me, it's a way of living that allows inspiration to flow through you. So that could apply to anything you're doing in life. And I think the challenge is identifying how and where are we blocking this inspiration, and how can we kind of unblock to let in whatever we're called to do in life. So like I said, one chapter, I'll read a short excerpt here, is actually entitled Allowing Ease. And it's this whole idea of giving ourselves permission. But I'll just read a short excerpt. I say, oftentimes our best progress comes through noticing what is easy. But instead of simply allowing what comes most naturally, we fall prey to thinking we need to make our work really hard. We believe that increased difficulty is somehow a sign we're on the right path. If we're not sweating enough, something's amiss, right? That certainly fits the American mantra of no pain, no gain. And then just a little bit below that, I say relaxing is often construed as a dirty word, but in our American culture. But when we relax, we let go of tension. We become more moldable and responsive and begin to trust our instincts. And, I'll stop there, but it's,
that's really, that's
allowing the instincts. So it's really a way of being that you could apply to anything you're doing. So I certainly wouldn't want people to get hung up on the word creativity, or because like I know you say a lot of people have blocks around that or think, well, I'm not creative. And okay, it's okay. It's really more about allowing flow and instinct and intuition into your life, and not buying into this mindset that the more we exert ourselves and the more we're physically exhausted, that those are markers we're on the right path, because that's just, it's not sustainable. It's not true, but our culture, I think, definitely teaches that. So
yeah, our culture reinforces burnout, and then they give the remedy for the burnout, and that doesn't, their remedy isn't always, the best thing. So how do you do that for yourself? How do you make this a way of being where you're kind of walking through your day and you're experiencing this flow or this ease, or, obviously it's not a sustainable 100% of the time way of being, although I do think some people do master this, but how do you practically do that for yourself?
I think, noticing, I think a lot of it's paying attention to my body and noticing where is there tension that I'm carrying that I'm not even aware I'm carrying. It's kind of becoming, one part is becoming a lot more self-aware instead of just going through autopilot and ignoring like my physical body or certainly emotions are part of it too. But so those are all clues to either am I carrying things that I'm not meant to be carrying? And then I can actually consciously release those things. I mean, we can't release things and operate in ease if we don't know what we're carrying in the first place. So a lot of it is paying attention. And also I feel like there's a fine line between, obviously we need to be proactive with whatever work we're doing in the world, and things require effort, but there's a fine line between being proactive and putting forth effort and banging your head against a wall when something's not working. And so I'm still, every day, or a week is a challenge for me to still figure out where that line is, but I'm getting better at, in terms of identifying flow. Like, what is that? What does that mean? It's like, well, it is kind of an abstract concept, but it's also, I don't know, every person has to find it for themselves, but it's that balance between, yes, we need to put forth effort to achieve what we're doing. And when is this becoming like, I'm actually, it's like self-harm because I'm like, it's not, nothing's moving, and then letting go and trying a different direction. So, I mean, it's a little bit nuanced that way, but.
Yeah. Speaking of just being in New Zealand, I met with an Indigenous healer who was really amazing. And I was kind of sharing with her my struggle because we took our whole family over there. I have 5 kids, and the 2 littlest ones were like 18 months and 3. And then I had 2 high schoolers and a child that had just graduated high school. And so here we all were plunked there. And I was experiencing a lot of, because we were in this smaller home and the 2 younger children were acting out. It was really intense. And I didn't have time to do my meditation. I didn't have, we were right across from the ocean, but it was like, and we were there all the time, but I still felt this like, I don't know if I'm even producing anything. I don't know if I'm getting anywhere. And it was just this battle between the masculine, like you're saying, no pain, no gain. But the children, it was showing up in their bodies and they were like freaking out. So I go to this healer and she's like, Cherie, that is your spiritual practice. Your spiritual practice is not to sit in meditation right now. Your spiritual practice is to find the connection to this land and let that work in you, and then just breathe into the chaos of the young children and the feelings you're working through around not being as productive as you would like to be, et cetera. So it just reframed for me that sometimes the spiritual practice is a moment by moment, our life is a spiritual practice.
Exactly. Yeah, no.
It's like the structure, I couldn't get structure and it was driving me crazy. And I wanted that, very linear type of life that all exploded when we moved to New Zealand. And it is exactly what we needed.
Yeah, no, I love that our life is the spiritual practice and we can't have it all compartmentalized as much as we might like that in the nice, neat little boxes, because life won't allow that. Pretty soon there'll be an eruption somewhere. And so, yeah, I think that's really good. And especially for people on a spiritual path, that I know from my whole life, having been on one, it's evolved a lot, but it's still easy for me to fall into that segmentation of like, oh, this is my spiritual time, quote unquote, when I go sit in the park or do, it's like, no, it's like, yes, that can be part of it, but it's also when I'm, stressed out and busy and all of life counts essentially. So, kind of reminding of that.
I remember when we were talking before, we were talking about, you had mentioned like welcoming abundance, like receiving it unto yourself as if it's just, you have everything at your fingertips and you're just receiving it. And then you talked about the value of a full heart. Do you want to expound on that and how those two are interrelated?
Yeah. Well, this also ties in a bit to what I mentioned about learning to receive. And in Mexico, I feel like I've received so much wealth. I mean, true wealth, this isn't material wealth now, obviously. Whether it's in connection to others or just the richness of the culture or spiritual discovery. So anyway, one of the chapters I write about is this experience of a full heart. And this was something different than that I often felt in my years living in the States, where I felt like I was running, partially on empty, or there was I wasn't at the level of burnout, but there's this piece of me that felt empty inside or hollow. And I think patriarchal cultures, have a preference for things kind of like brute strength or exerting power over other people or doing things by force, which can all lead to these kind of your heart not feeling full. It's like a self-effort focused mindset, as opposed to the heartfulness, this idea of your heart being full. It's really a measure of well-being. And so, and that's very much, I think, a more feminine value to look at. Is my cup filled? And do I prioritize filling my own cup before tending to the needs of others? So that's something I've really experienced quite a bit. And I've also had to surrender guilt that I had around that when I first moved here, because I wasn't used to like having this, not all the time, but fairly consistently full heart. That wasn't normal for me. So I was like, oh, is this okay? Do I have permission to feel this? So, that was a piece of it for me too. But
we do resist joy and abundance because I think we're acculturated on some level to think we don't deserve it until we do certain things. Like there's no grace there.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I love that. I love the visual of a full heart. For me, a signal that I get from my body when my heart's not, the messages of my heart are not making it to my head, let's just say, with intimations or intuitions or like slow down or feel this or that, is I feel constriction in my throat. And one of the things that I've learned in my many years of researching mind body stuff is that the throat is the highway of emotion that runs, between your head and your heart, or your heart and your head. And so when you talked about that in your book, and you talked about having a full heart, that makes a lot of sense. I think the heart is actually always full for us. We just don't listen to it. We don't recognize it. And we feel this overwhelm or this burnout or the sadness, really, the grief of that disconnection. Yeah. And that's the illusion. We're never really disconnected, but I love what you're talking about, just allowing the reception of that and letting yourself receive it, because it's the awareness that your life is already full.
Yes,
you have everything you need.
Yeah. And I think that's a perfect tie into this whole idea of abundance, that's the actual reality of the universe. We live in an abundant universe, but we get disconnected from that. So it's like when we can remember, like, oh, I'm actually in this field of abundance, my life, like energetically, and learning how to adjust our posture so that we can receive. And then it just ushers us into this whole other way of being that is more about synchronicities and flow and allowing for these things, as opposed to the, again, doing things by brute force. I think the brute force mentality is driven by the opposite, like a scarcity mindset, right? So if there's not enough, then you got to have power over other people and like assert your agenda and all these things. So it leads to behaviors that are unhealthy for everybody and for ourselves. So yeah. And that kind of leads into another thing that you and I are really aligned with, which is claiming your inner authority and then really stepping into that, like not just
this inner experience of like trusting your inner authority, but claiming it, which is a whole other energy, and then really using your physical body to step into that authority. So what has that, I've had my own path with it and it's still a work in progress, but how is that manifesting for you? How do you know when you're out of alignment there, or you've lost that claiming, if you will?
Back? Well, for me, it's definitely part of my journey with that has been learning to trust my inner authority in the first place, right? Because I think we're very conditioned to look to the outer authority, whether that's the teacher at the school or the person at the church or your boss or whatever. We're inundated with external authority figures that teach us to not trust our own authority. So that's been probably the beginning piece of me is recognizing, authority dwells within me, and I can actually learn to tap into that. That was very fun or very significant. That's the word on my journey. But yeah, I think when I'm operating in my inner authority, there's I feel a sense of ease and a sense of calm that isn't always there when I'm not. Because I feel like when I stop operating in my inner authority and start looking, too much to the outer and this and that, it kind of starts to feel like grasping at straws a little bit. Like I'm looking for the one thing out there in my outer world that's going to anchor me. That's the word. So when I'm in my inner authority, I feel anchored. That's probably the best word. And from that place, then I feel like that's the place that I'm strongest, when I'm actually fully anchored. Yeah. Yeah,
I love that. And that's why I changed the name of the podcast from Women Seeking Wholeness, just that energy of seeking outside yourself, seeking for that validation, those externals, right? Even though I had really good intentions with that title, it was like, seek within, of course, but then just this perpetual seeking, it just didn't feel aligned anymore. It was like, no, like the search is over for all of us. Really, it's about come home to yourself, claim that inner voice, that inner authority, that inner alignment is there for you. When you trust that, you use the word trust. It's just huge.
Yes.
Massive. But then stepping into your power from that place, it doesn't mean you're going to be dominating or oppressing or all of these things we've been told that power is. It's actually a beautiful, gentle, invitational, collaborative power when you are in alignment. And you're not going to be deceived, and you're not going to go out of balance. And those are the other things that I was programmed with, that if I was only looking to my own authority, that I would fall off the path. I would be deceived by Satan or whatever forces, and that I can't really trust that I need leaders and other way shores to take me there. And I know that those things are helpful, but ultimately I kind of graduated, and that's what Sue Monk Kidd talks about in her book. Like she graduated from that dynamic.
Yes.
She appreciated it, having that foundation laid, but at some point, that emancipation, the soul wants to be free of external validation and authority at some point.
Yeah. And I think that's a natural progression of a spiritual journey and spiritual maturation, frankly, where like those earlier things play a role, where you're getting helpful guidance and wisdom from others. I mean, those do help provide a really beautiful foundation, but eventually we have to come into ourselves. And that includes trusting who we are, trusting our gifts, trusting our inner knowings, and learning to honor them too. I think that's another piece I wasn't necessarily taught growing up. It was more of a shame-based culture that who you are internally is flawed somehow or deficient, as opposed to what you're saying. No, we're already whole, and learning how to tap into that place, it just creates an entirely different energetic field that's frankly much more appealing.
Yeah, I want that.
Yeah,
I want that.
Yeah.
Well, this is lovely. I know we could continue to explore these beautiful feminine aspects of transformation. And I think your book is so eloquent and so deep. And why don't you tell people like the name of it again, Doorway to Transformation, but I always forget the byline, and then where people can find it and you online.
Sure. Yeah, it's Doorways to Transformation, Everyday Wisdom for the Creative Soul. And you can find it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. It's on Audible. You can also go to my website and find links there. And my website is my name, Karen Kinney, KINNEY.com.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for the reminder to not take this linear path that my brain really like this. And I mean, in everyday things, not just my global spiritual path. I'm talking about, this war, or this tension, I should say, not war, but there's this tension on wanting the structure and the linear, and they hold their place. But when it comes to my spirituality, I just want to explore. And I think we all want that permission, right?
Yeah. And it's learning to operate in both. The left side in structure is very helpful. It's just that it can produce a rigidity that keeps us from exploring. And if we're called to explore, we need to learn how to create a better balance. So
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I love that. And I love that we get to have these conversations about allowing and receiving, because that's our birthright, right? To have that grace and flow and ease. That's what we're moving towards.
Definitely.
Thanks so much, Karen.
Yeah. Thank you, Cherie.
So as we look at all these feminine aspects of transformation, it really boils down and distills down to trusting your life path. Not seeking, respecting maybe, but not seeking external validation and approval. And then just really trying to get yourself into a flow of recognizing when you're in and out of alignment. So that's what I took away from this episode. Remember that you can always head over to standspeakshine.com and grab my new course. Well, it's actually a revamped course that I've had out for a few years, but it's the Stand, Speak, Shine course. It's only $222. It goes into 12 feminine embodiment practices, or 12 feminine principles that are actually really aligned with my discussion with Karen. So I'm going to put that little bee in your bonnet that you head over and grab that course. I put a lot of my heart into it. A lot of it was downloaded in the moment. So if you want to learn more about it, head over to standspeakshine.com and check out that course. And as always, I invite you to have the most glorious week. We'll talk to you next time on Stand, Speak, Shine.